Hey everybody, Jamie with Heroic Scale Gamers. From building your first box of minis and paint to being a competent player at the gaming table, we got you covered. I'm back with actually the first installment of getting some paint on these Harlequin Troupe models. I basically have here one of the primed miniatures on my handy dandy Citadel paint handle. Paint handles are actually a really great tool to use to give you control without actually having to touch the model itself. Because every time you touch the model, you have an opportunity to damage something you've previously painted. So I really enjoy using paint handles. You can get fancy ones like this, but I've used medicine bottles. I've used alphabet blocks that my young daughters had when they were little. Just throw a little bit of double-sided tape on it and it works just the same. But we're going to start this one by doing all of our base coats. We have three colors we're going to be base coating. We're going to be base coating some reds, some gray, and some gold. So I'm going to start with some red, and I'm using some Pro Acryl Burnt Red. This is a very nice, vibrant red color. I don't need a whole lot of it on my palette. So I'm going to use my character brush here from Army Painter. And the surfaces that we're going to be painting red are going to be the shoulder pads. So we're going to start up here and throw some of this red down on this nice shoulder pad here. And then we're going to also put it on her backpack module. It sits off her back. We're basically going to coat the whole thing with this nice burnt red. Get us a nice base coat down. And then we're going to come in later on with a brighter red to brighten them up just slightly. So this is where the paint handle really comes in handy. I find that it allows me to manipulate the model around so that I can get to all the areas that I want to get the paint on without having to excessively handle the model itself. And the nice thing here is that this tends to go on quite thin. And so sometimes it will take a second coat to get a full opaqueness. I want to make sure we get all the parts that we want to be red. Then we're also going to do these cloth here that hangs down off from underneath her belt. So when I speak of opaqueness, basically what that is these paints tend to be very, very thin because we thin them down with a little bit of water, and it allows the undercolor to show through. So a second and third coat will allow you to then get full coverage with your color. And that's where the term opaque comes from, because it's not see-through. If you've ever played a war game, which I'm assuming if you're watching us paint these wargaming models, you have, you've seen opaque dice before, and it's the same concept. So it would be just a solid color all the way through. You can't see through it. So like your black dice with yellow pips would be an opaque dice. And paint color works the same way. If you thin something down too much, obviously it's going to show through with the undercoat. And we don't want that always. There are some times when it's good. There are definitely some techniques that you can use that you might want to be able to see the undercoat show through. But in this case, no, we want a nice solid color, a nice solid base coat. So a lot of people will ask, why am I so gentle when I'm doing this process? And part of that is because I don't like to clean up at the end. The neater I can be through these stages, the faster I can get the miniatures finished, and the quicker they get on the table. So a little bit of extra time and effort at this point saves me a ton of time in the end. And like I said, the faster I can get models onto the tabletop, the better. The only thing I would suggest is to make sure that you allow your paint to fully dry before you go over with a second coat, because then at that point you're not actually putting on any extra paint. You're just moving around the paint that was on there previously. So we'll get this red finished here, and then we'll move on to our next color, which is going to be our Celestra Gray. We're going to put that on her pants. Excellent. Good. Now, in the finished model that I was showing here, you can see I've basically quartered her armor, or her underskin, or whatever you want to call it, her unitard. So it's quartered in grays and blacks. So the upper right-hand corner here is gray, the bottom lower left-hand corner is gray, which leaves the upper left-hand corner black and the lower right-hand corner black. I'm going to actually flip-flop that on this model here. So whereas this was the gray in the last one, we're actually going to make the gray on this side and here, and then we're going to do the black here and here. So we're going to take some Celestra Gray. Now, if you've watched the Star Weaver video, you will see that I used this paint once before on that to go over the windshield. And basically, I said that you want to make sure that you water it down just slightly, because you want it as smooth as possible. You want to do the same thing here, because these base colors have a tendency sometimes to be a little chunky. So if you water it down just slightly, it allows for more smooth coverage. And then I always wash my brush off before I load it up with paint to actually put on the miniature, because I don't want to go on with too much. And so let's start with her leg here. Just gonna basically put this gray on, a nice smooth coat all the way across. I'm going to get the entirety of the leg, and then we're going to do that upper left arm. Move that a little bit closer so you can see a little bit better. There we go. Once again, you know, I'm being careful, but not terribly careful. If I do make a mistake, it's actually not real hard to go back and fix. But once again, the less things I have to correct, the faster I can get this little lady onto the tabletop. The faster I can get her on the tabletop, the quicker we can enjoy her. Now, for me, I actually really enjoy painting. It's one of my favorite parts of the hobby. It's part of the reason why I'm doing this series, because I'd like to share that with other people. There are a lot of people who find this tedious and not a lot of fun. And I think that part of that is because people think it's hard, and we don't necessarily like to do things that we think are hard. But I can tell you, painting actually isn't hard. It just takes practice. And there is something nice about just sitting down and putting on a Netflix movie, or maybe some Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is actually one of my favorite things to watch when I'm painting, because I'm not actually watching it, I'm just listening to it. Maybe even a battle report from Heroic Scale Gamers. Hint, hint, nod, nod. Check those out. We might even link one in the description for you to check out while you're doing your own painting. There we go. So we got some nice smooth gray, and then we're going to make sure we touch the bottom of her foot here too, because she's actually wearing a unitard. Right. The underside there. Ready to do her arm. Perfect. All right, so now let's move on to her arm. Now what's really nice here is the arm's a very small piece. So there's not actually a whole lot to it. But once again, we just want to be nice and careful. We want to get in there and make sure that we get all of it. Bring it all the way up to the bangle on her wrist, which we will end up base coating gold in just a moment. Perfect. Now, we can get our retributor gold, get that placed onto our palette so that we can finish off our base coating. Now if you notice, I don't use the same brush to pull from my pot as I do to put on the miniature, and that's on purpose, because I like to keep the points of my bristles nice and sharp for as long as possible. And if you dip into a paint pot with a brush, almost 90% of the time you're going to get paint all the way up to this ferrule, which is the metal part. And once paint gets in there, that's what causes your brush to flare out. So the less paint you can get in that area, the longer life your brushes will have. All right, so from a gold standpoint, there's only a couple of places on here that are actually going to be this gold. One is going to be this bangle around her foot. One is going to be the bangle, the gauntlet actually around her wrist. I guess that'd probably be a better term there. All right, now if you look too, there's some wires that are coming off the weapon that connect to the gauntlet. We want to actually leave those black for now, because actually we will touch those with some white at some point just to make them kind of stand out. Perfect. And then we're going to do the tip of her blaster here. We're going to do her belt, and we're going to do her mask. And then those are going to be all of our base coats. Now, what's really neat about this series is we're not doing very many advanced techniques, actually. We're just doing a lot of basic techniques, but we're doing them very well. We're going to come in and we're going to get her belt here. We're going to actually leave the gem black But we're going to paint the casing around the gem. And then just like with any other belt, it actually goes pretty much all the way around the waist. So we'll make sure we get all the way around to the back side. And then if you look, there's a little hose that connects to the back piece. We just want to do that connector piece. We don't actually want to do the hose itself. We're going to leave the hose black. Get up in there. And we got that there, then we're going to get our mask, and that's going to be all of our base coats done. Once again, you know, like I said, the more patience that you can have at this point, the easier the later steps are going to be for you. Now, if you look, there's a little rim that goes around the edge of her mask. We also want to make sure we touch that with our gold, because it's going to give it a more complete look. Now, I know it's a little difficult sometimes to get into some of these areas, and this is where our paint handle comes in very handy. It allows us to manipulate the model without actually touching it too much, which will actually allow us to get to some of these harder to reach areas. And then I always like to come in from the bottom to make sure that I get the edge of the jaw. So, all right. All right. And with that being done, as you can see now, we have base coats on all of the main parts of our model. And we're going to set that aside and then come back and you can join us for the next step.